Madam President, distinguished members of the Court, good morning. It's a privilege to appear before you today on behalf of the Republic of Armenia. As the Honorable Agent just said, we come before you today to request your urgent intervention to end an ongoing humanitarian catastrophe. Since 12 December last year, the ethnic Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh has been almost entirely cut off from the outside world. They have been, and they continue to be, deprived of access to food, medicine, and all the other necessities of life. Without swift action by the court, their lives are in danger. My intervention this morning will focus on the facts justifying Armenia's request for provisional measures. It'll be divided into three parts. First, I will describe the essential facts of the blockade and the context in which it is occurring. Second, I will discuss the dire humanitarian consequences that Azerbaijan's actions are having. Third, I will address Azerbaijan's excuses about why it is not responsible for the situation and show why none of them is credible. So, to the blockade and the relevant context. The court will recall that tens of thousands of ethnic Armenians were forcibly displaced from territories conquered by Azerbaijan during the 44-day war in 2020. Not a single person has been able to return to their home. When the war ended, the Russian Federation sent peacekeepers to the region to, and these are the words of the Federation Council decree authorizing the deployment, quote, prevent the mass death of the civilian population of Nagorno-Karabakh, end quote. Even so, Azerbaijan has been doing its best to make the lives of the remaining ethnic Armenians in the region intolerable. It has attacked Armenian villages in violation of the ceasefire agreement. It has forcibly displaced residents, including all Armenians from the villages of Parukh, Berdzor, Agavno, and Sus. It has intimidated and killed Armenians who just happened to be going about their lives near its armed forces. And it has repeatedly cut off access to gas, mobile communications, and internet. Azerbaijan has always been blunt about its objective. Speaking at the opening of a new residential complex for veterans and their families in Baku in May 2022, for instance, President Aliyev said, and I quote, "Our primary duty was to expel the Armenians from our lands," end quote. And this is a man, you will recall, who was fond of calling Armenians dogs, vandals, savages, and barbarians. Even more chilling is the postage stamp issued in late 2020 by Azerbaijan's state-owned stamp company. It is on the screen now. We showed this to you during the previous hearing on provisional measures. You see the image at the top. It depicts a person in a hazmat suit disinfecting Nagorno-Karabakh. Evidently, Azerbaijan considers Armenians in the region as in need of eradication. After the war, around 120,000 ethnic Armenians are left in Nagorno-Karabakh. They are connected to Armenia and thus to the outside world by a single tenuous thread, the Gorish-Stepanakert Highway, running through the Lachin corridor. You can see that on the map on the screen now, which we show for illustrative purposes. There are no roads open to Armenian civilians connecting Nagorno-Karabakh with Azerbaijan. It is also impossible to fly there because Azerbaijan has threatened to shoot down any aircraft that attempt to use the Stepanakert airport. The highway is thus the only means of transporting anything and anyone into and out of Nagorno-Karabakh. Under the trilateral statement brokered by the Russian Federation that ended the 2020 war, Azerbaijan is specifically required to, quote, guarantee safe movement of civilians, vehicles, and cargo in both directions along the Lachin corridor. Before the blockade, Nagorno-Karabakh imported some 400 tons of essential goods every day. Likewise, residents needing medical treatment elsewhere or wishing to travel outside Nagorno-Karabakh for any reason had to take this road. Then, 50 days ago, on the morning of 12 December, a group of Azerbaijanis dressed in civilian clothes and claiming to be, quote, eco-activists occupied a segment of the Gorish highway near the city of Shushi, which has been under the control of Azerbaijan since the end of the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War. These ostensible activists claim to be protesting allegedly harmful mining activities in Nagorno-Karabakh and prevented vehicles from passing. It was a poor cover story from the very beginning. Nobody really believes the protesters are genuinely concerned about the environment in Nagorno-Karabakh. One real Azerbaijani environmental activist posted on Facebook the very day the blockade started that, quote, it is clear as the sky that the protest of the, quote, environmental activists in Karabakh is a made-up story. Until today, I have not seen a single person there caring at all about environmental issues. These guys are just executives of a custom-tailored spectacle. An independent Azerbaijani news source interviewed a number of the protesters. Only a tiny fraction represented environmental organizations. In point of fact, many represent NGOs funded either by the Azerbaijani government or the Haidar Aliyev Foundation. Social media also abounds with photos of so-called protesters wearing military uniforms. In fact, one of the alleged leaders of the so-called protesters, Mr. Telman Kazimov, is reported to be an officer of Azerbaijan's military special intelligence service. The wholly fictitious nature of the protesters' environmental concerns is also shown by other facts. Just 2 days after the blockade started, the authorities in Nagorno-Karabakh relented to the protesters' demands that international observers be allowed to monitor the two mines allegedly at the center of the protests. They adopted a resolution specifically authorizing Russian and Azerbaijani observers. Azerbaijan did not accept. And a couple of weeks later, the authorities ceased mining operations in the two mines altogether. The blockade continues nevertheless, with no end in sight. Azerbaijanis also have far worse environmental problems, much closer to home to worry about. Oil and gas exploitation in the country has had devastating environmental consequences, including in the Caspian Sea. But somehow, the Gorish highway is the only place these alleged activists choose to protest. Moreover, shortly after the blockade began, the protesters started adding demands that had nothing to do with their putative environmental concerns and had a distinctly more sovereign character. They insisted, for instance, that border and customs control posts be established on the roadway. They also spend far more time chanting slogans praising the Azerbaijani military than raising their voices about environmental issues. The chant, quote, "The Azerbaijani soldier is the greatest soldier," is one of their favorites. So what's really going on here? It's obvious. Azerbaijan is trying to fulfill what President Aliyev called its, quote, primary duty, to expel Armenians from its lands. How do we know that? Well, President Aliyev himself said so. Speaking about the situation on the highway in a 10 January 2023 interview, he told the assembled press, quote, "Whoever does not want to become our citizen, the road is not closed, it is open. They can leave whenever they want. No one would stop them. They can travel in the back of the peacekeepers' trucks or take a bus. The road is open." The road is open for those who want to leave. Azerbaijan's purpose could not be clearer. The racial animus of the protesters themselves is equally evident. There are numerous photos and videos on social media of the protesters displaying the hand gesture of the notorious pan-Turkic ultranational group, the Grey Wolves, which is widely condemned for anti-Armenian violence and hate speech. On the screen now is just one such photo. Another video on Twitter shows protesters enjoying what is obviously a chartered bus ride to the site, merrily singing a song. The lyrics include, quote, "Let those mountains see gray wolves again. Leave the land of Oghuz," that is Turks, "and run away." At the end of the video, one grinning passenger proudly makes the same gray wolves hand gesture, as you can see on the screen now. Protesters' social media accounts also frequently contain the vilest forms of hate speech. Our provisional measures request contains many of these examples. For now, I will cite just one to illustrate the point. This image is from the Facebook account of one so-called protester. It shows a patch depicting the notorious Ottoman genocidaire Enver Pasha with the inscription, "Armenian, don't run. You'll die anyway. Just exhausted." The steps Azerbaijan has taken to expel Armenians from their homeland are not limited to blockading the Gorish-Stepanakert highway. It is making their lives intolerable in other ways, too. It has cut the supply of natural gas, essential to heat homes and businesses, during the coldest months of the year. The court may recall that last year, Azerbaijan twice cut off the supply of gas, only to restore it as soon as Armenia brought it to the urgent attention of the court. Now, just since the start of the blockade, Azerbaijan has interrupted the gas supply on 5 different occasions. On December 13th for 3 days, on January 17th for 1 day, on January 18th for 3 days, and again on 21 January for 3.5 days. On 25 January, there was a brief respite. At around 11 a.m., a 48% increase in the flow of gas was reported, providing some measure of relief, but not nearly enough to meet the needs of the population. After the gas was fully restored on January 26, it was once again cut on January 29th. Bear in mind that all of this is happening during winter, when temperatures regularly fall below 0 degrees Celsius. That is not all. On 9 January, Azerbaijan appears to have damaged the only high-voltage power line connecting Gorish and Stepanakert, leaving the population of Nagorno-Karabakh without a steady electricity supply. Azerbaijan, again, is not allowing Armenian technicians to repair the damage. Currently, the only available electricity comes from the limited local sources, including from the Sarsang Reservoir, which has been placed under great stress. This has entailed 6-hour rolling blackouts per day. As things stand, even longer daily blackouts seem likely to be imposed in the future. I come then to the second part of my intervention, the humanitarian consequences of Azerbaijan's actions. These are not hard to imagine. The Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh is, as I said, approximately 120,000 people. This includes 30,000 children and 20,000 elderly. The population is essentially the same as the city of Leiden with students. What would happen to the people there if it were essentially walled off from the outside world for 50 days, with only the most minimal trickle of goods allowed in and gas and electricity supplies cut off? No great leap of imagination is required to answer that question. In our written request filed at the end of last month, we focused significant attention on critically ill Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh who required treatment in Armenia but were trapped in Nagorno-Karabakh. Since then, thanks only to the urgent intervention of the ICRC, around 50 patients have been transferred to Armenia. Nevertheless, as the agent said, one person has already died. More than 10 children remain in the neonatal and intensive care units of the Children's Hospital, and a similar number of adults are in the intensive care unit. Their lives thus continue to be at risk without needed medical care. The blockade has also separated many families. More than 1,000 civilians from Nagorno-Karabakh were either in Armenia or en route to Armenia when the blockade began. About 50 children were left without parental care when their parents were stranded in Armenia. One mother was separated from her 8-month-old baby for weeks. Of those trapped in Armenia, 270 were children attending the Junior Eurovision Song Contest, about 70 without their parents. Many still have not been able to get home and are living temporarily in Gorish or Yerevan. Those that have been able to go home have only been able to do so with the intervention of the ICRC. As I said before the blockade, some 400 tons of essential goods, including food and medicine, were imported to Nagorno-Karabakh from Armenia on a daily basis. Only a small fraction of that is now getting through, either on Russian peacekeeping trucks or with the ICRC. Now, 50 days on, the situation is critical. Grocery store shelves are empty and pharmacies are running out of medicine. On the screen now, you can see a photo from an international press report of the situation. And this was taken more than 2 weeks ago. Things are so dire that the authorities have had to institute a rationing system. As of 20 January, residents must use vouchers for limited supplies of essential products like sunflower oil, eggs, dairy, rice, sugar, buckwheat, and pasta. The authorities have also had to tap into their wartime reserves to meet the needs of their population. In addition, the lack of gas and electricity means that people have been left without heat and the ability to prepare food. It has also impacted health care, with many urgent treatments, planned surgeries, laboratory tests, and physical examinations having to be canceled or postponed. As goods and fuel run out, economic life is also grinding to a halt. As of 20 January, hundreds of businesses are closed and thousands of people are out of work. And all 117 schools in the region have been closed since 20 January. In light of the unfolding humanitarian catastrophe, calls for Azerbaijan to lift the blockade have come from all across the international community. By way of example only, on 19 January, the European Parliament overwhelmingly passed a resolution expressly taking note of the danger the people of Nagorno-Karabakh are facing and calling on Azerbaijan to end the blockade. Specifically, the resolution states, among other things, quote, "The blockade has led to a severe humanitarian crisis, significantly affecting the most vulnerable populations. Whereas the transfer of critically ill patients is nearly impossible, with one death resulting from this situation. Whereas hundreds of families remain separated, and this humanitarian crisis was further aggravated by Azerbaijan's disruption of the natural gas supply to Nagorno-Karabakh, which left houses, hospitals, and schools without heating. Accordingly, the resolution, quote, deplores the tragic humanitarian consequences of the blockade of the Lachin corridor in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and urges Azerbaijan to respect and implement the trilateral statement of 9 November and immediately reopen the Lachin corridor to enable free movement and ensure access to essential goods and services, thus guaranteeing security in the region and safeguarding residents' livelihoods." The EU Parliament's call fell on deaf ears in Azerbaijan. That brings me, Madam President, to the last part of my presentation this morning. Faced with these stark and widely condemned facts, what does Azerbaijan say? Not much, actually. We look forward to hearing what it has to say later today, but we expect it will be much of the same. For now, I will address what little we have to work with. I will start with what it has said to this court. In its first letter to the court dated 3 January, Azerbaijan presented what it called its initial response and promised to provide more information later. Azerbaijan first asserted the road, quote, is controlled by Russian Federation peacekeepers in application of the trilateral statement, not Azerbaijan. This assertion, of course, entirely overlooks the fact that in paragraph 6 of the trilateral statement, Azerbaijan specifically undertook to, quote, guarantee safe movement of citizens, vehicles, and cargo in both directions along the Lachin corridor. Azerbaijan's assertion also overlooks the fact that the alleged protesters are its own citizens, who can only be there because it was only recently conquered by Azerbaijan with the express permission of the government. Indeed, Azerbaijan's own evidence proves the point. Annex 14 to its letter, submitted last Tuesday, is a collection of NGO requests for authorization from the Office of the President to protest at the site. Having given the protesters permission to be where they are, President Aliyev can just as easily take it away. Azerbaijan next claimed that, quote, protesters are not blocking the road and that the Russian Federation peacekeepers are allowing the passage of residents, essential medical services, and humanitarian supplies on the Lachin road. Orwell's line about rejecting the evidence of your eyes and ears seems apposite here. Literally no one in the world outside of Azerbaijan actually believes the protesters are not blocking the road. On 13 December, the Russian peacekeepers reported that, quote, on 12 December, the Azerbaijani side blocked the Stepanakert-Goris road. On the screen now is another picture taken from the site. If this is not blocking the road, I don't know what it is. Nor does anyone believe that vehicles are getting through freely. Just recently, the UN Human Rights Chief, Volker Turk, called, quote, for free and safe movement through Lachin corridor to be immediately and fully enabled, saying, quote, unrestricted access to food, medicine, and other basic goods and services is essential to the enjoyment of human rights of the affected population. If vehicles were truly passing freely, why would the ICRC or the Russian peacekeepers each time have to negotiate with the Azerbaijanis blocking the road in order to get critically ill patients out of Nagorno-Karabakh to get the medical care they need? And why would it be necessary for the ICRC and the Russian peacekeepers to be the ones to deliver the few meager supplies that are getting through? The evidence Azerbaijan cited to support the assertion in its letter about the road not being blocked is contained in a single footnote that lists 3 sources. The first is an article from Azerbaijani state media reporting on the passage of just 3 ICRC vehicles. The text of the article is revealing, and in a way that is not helpful to Azerbaijan. Remember, this is from Azerbaijani state media. It says, quote, "Today, conditions were created for the passage of 3 vehicles belonging to the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, on the Kakendi-Lachin Road. The participants of the action pulled out of the road and opened a corridor for the passage of cars." The participants of the action pulled out of the road and opened a corridor for the passage of cars. In other words, they temporarily lifted the blockade just so 3 ICRC vehicles could pass. The 3 January letter also referred to a tweet from a senior government official with an embedded video showing protesters, quote, "standing aside," so again, lifting the blockade, to let 3 ICRC vehicles pass. And the only other so-called evidence is a self-serving statement to the Security Council by Azerbaijan's permanent representative to the UN. In its 3 January letter, Azerbaijan also alleged that, quote, "Armenia willfully and unlawfully has been using the Lachin Road to traffic weapons, including recently laid landmines and booby traps that continue to kill and maim Azerbaijanis, and illegally mined minerals between Armenia and Azerbaijan's sovereign territory," end quote. We will have a lot more to say about that claim tomorrow. Today, let me simply say that there is not even a shred of evidence to support it. Nothing. It is also worth recalling that the road has been under the supervision of the Russian peacekeepers since November 2020, and that not a single one of their daily bulletins has reported the alleged transport of weapons, landmines, or minerals. In its second letter to the court, dated 12 January, Azerbaijan did not really offer any more information as it said it would. It does little more than repeat the contents of its first letter, saying that, quote, "The Lachin Road is controlled by Russian peacekeepers, and Azerbaijan does not exercise control over who is using the road in either direction," and that, quote, "Vehicles continue to pass next to the protest site unimpeded," end quote. As I have largely dealt with these assertions, I will not repeat myself. I just note that whereas its first letter contained only a single evidentiary footnote about the passage of vehicles, its second letter contains 8. Still, they add nothing. The 8 footnotes are all references to Azerbaijani state media reports, all of which mention only Russian peacekeeping or ICRC vehicles passing the site after negotiation with the Azerbaijanis. I'm sure we'll hear more of the same this afternoon. But the point is, these special exceptions for outside parties with special responsibilities only serve to prove the rule that the road is not open as usual. Outside the court, Azerbaijan has sometimes tried a different approach, claiming the protests are a simple manifestation of its people's right to protest. In a 23 December 22 statement, for example, the Azerbaijani Ministry of Foreign Affairs referred to the, quote, "peaceful protest on Lachin Road with a demand to prevent the illegal exploitation of Azerbaijani's natural resources, the transportation of these resources from Azerbaijan to Armenia, and the abuse of the Lachin Road, the use of which is intended only for humanitarian purposes, end quote. There are a number of problems with this pretense. First, even if it were true that the protests really were private individuals who were genuinely concerned about the environment, which, as I explained, it distinctly is not, that would not justify their actions or Azerbaijan's failure to disperse them. Any right to protest would be outweighed by the grievous harm inflicted on the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh. The Azerbaijani government could not be justified in leaving the protesters alone, given that very real harm. The claim that these are just spontaneous manifestations of private discontent is also put to the lie by the fact that Azerbaijan is not a free country in which public protests are tolerated. Freedom House, for one, has ranked Azerbaijan as, quote, not free, in part because of a lack of freedom of assembly. In a 2022 report, it wrote, quote, unsanctioned assemblies can draw a harsh police response and fines for participants. This assembly, in contrast, is plainly sanctioned, indeed staged, by the government. Azerbaijan's excuses regarding the interruptions of gas and electricity are equally unconvincing, indeed entirely contradictory. According to documents Azerbaijan submitted last Tuesday, on 15 December, the Azerbaijani Minister of Foreign Affairs claimed that Azerbaijan had no control over the gas supply, saying, quote, the gas supply in the said areas is carried out by Armenia, and that those areas are not integrated into the supply system of our country, end quote. Only 4 days later, on 19 December 2022, in a letter from the permanent representative of Azerbaijan to the UN, Azerbaijan tried a different excuse for the disruptions, blaming, quote, technical reasons, including bad weather conditions currently observed in certain mountainous regions of Azerbaijan, end quote. It then said, due to immediate steps taken by Azerbaijani authorities, technical problems have now been fixed. And as of now, gas supply in the area is resumed, end quote. It said much the same thing in a letter to the court last year about earlier disruptions, writing that, quote, employees of Azerigas worked on site to restore service, which was fully restored by 28 March, end quote. So does Azerbaijan have control over the gas supply, or doesn't it? Azerbaijan can't seem to get its story straight. In truth, there really can be no doubt that Azerbaijan does have full control over the gas supply. How do we know? President Aliyev himself said so. Speaking in the aftermath of gas disruptions in the spring of 2022, President Aliyev boasted, if we didn't want to, we wouldn't restore the gas supply. Who can tell us anything? Did we owe them to restore it? No. At the end of the day, the reality of what is happening is painfully simple and brutally clear. The ethnic Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh are under siege. For those who choose to stay, their only access to the outside world is blocked. Everything else they need to continue living where they have for millennia is rationed or gone already. This includes food, medicine, heat, and electricity. The cover story Azerbaijan came up with to mask its actions is pure fiction. The alleged eco-activists conducting the blockade are nothing of the sort. They have no genuine environmental pedigree and are a mixture of government-funded private citizens and government and military personnel, all united by a deep, long-taught hatred of Armenians. They are there with the government's support and approval to advance the government's agenda, to make life unbearable for the ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. The government of Azerbaijan could put an end to the blockade before I finish this speech, if it wanted to. but it has no interest in doing so. An order of the court is therefore required as a matter of urgency. Thank you, Madam President. Distinguished members of the court, may I ask that you invite Professor Sicilianos to the podium.